Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 104, Over My Dead Body. Izuku watched in horror as the giant of a creature grabbed Eraser's arms, snapped them like twigs, and smashed his face into the concrete, barely leaving enough room for him to cry out in pain. Before Izuku even thought about moving, he was already out of the water and halfway to the center of the plaza. His legs gave off the telltale ache that told him he used just a little too much power again. They weren't broken yet, but Kami, they hurt. He watched as the creature grabbed Eraser's head and poised itself to smash his already mangled face into the concrete for a second time. Izuku saw red. Damn the consequences. He wasn't going to let that thing hurt Eraser any more than it already had. Any questions he had about whether or not it was human were deemed irrelevant as he grabbed the knife off his thigh and sent it flying into the beast's exposed brain. It let out an awful wailing sound and dropped Eraser back onto the ground. Within a second, Izuku finally made his way there and delivered the hardest punch he trusted himself to make without shattering his bones to dust. He expected that to knock the creature back. He expected that to hurt. He expected that to do something, but it didn't. Eraser was still pinned beneath it, and now every villain in the plaza had their eyes on him. Shit. You hurt my Nomu, the apparent ringleader cried out as he frantically scratched at his neck. Everything stood still for a moment. He saw Eraser weakly struggling under the beast. He was saying something, surely trying to tell him to get out of there, so Izuku readily ignored it. His attention was already split between the Nomu and this scraggly creep that disintegrated Eraser's elbow. "You've got cheats on, don't you?" he asked hysterically. He looked insane. He sounded psychotic. He reminded Izuku of the leader of the Yakudo, the man who was so angry that he was willing to burn all his men and his base to the ground just to kill Izuku. He was deranged, and Izuku knew not to underestimate him. You don't screw with crazy. The beast didn't seem to have the ability to act on its own. As long as he could keep Crazy occupied, Eraser would be safe. All right. Okay. He could do this. Cheats? Izuku prompted. He was fumbling, but he needed to keep him talking. Yes! Cheats! My Nomu was made to kill All Might. A puny twerp like you shouldn't be able to hurt it. Made? What's this big guy your son? You look nothing alike. Plus, you seem a little young. No, you brat! Nomu is the bioengineered anti-symbol of peace. It was made to kill All Might. So where is he? Okay, so not human. Good to know. I'm just a student. I don't get updates on the teacher's whereabouts. He tried to assuage. Making him angrier wasn't what they needed right now. The man looked like he was about to go on another hysterical rant when a purple misty cloud materialized next to him. Tomura Shigaraki, it greeted. Thankfully, the newcomer's presence had a calming effect on Shigaraki. Ah, Kurogiri, did you manage to kill 13? He asked. The rescue hero is out of commission, but there were students I wasn't able to disperse of. One of them got outside of the facility. Yes! Kami, he hoped that it was Ida he was talking about. They needed backup ASAP. Unfortunately, that news seemed to have set Shigaraki off again. Izuku didn't like the manic tone in his voice as he growled like an animal and clawed at his neck. He started threatening Kurogiri, and Izuku took that as an opportunity. In that moment of distraction, he turned back to the Nomu and leapt up onto its shoulders, wrenching the knife out of the thing's brain and plunging it back in as many times as he could as the beast howled in pain. Apparently, it had some semblance of survival instincts because it batted Izuku off its shoulders, sending him flying several yards across the plaza and into the fountain. Through his dazed mind, he heard Shigaraki snap and give the order to kill that damn brat. In a second, he watched as a massive fist came barreling down toward him, and it was all he could do to meet it blow for blow, resulting in what must have been the world's most powerful and painful fist bump. The resulting shockwave didn't affect the Nomu in the slightest. It reminded him of the man he'd faced as Ivy, the guy who stabbed Eraser with that stupid knife gun, the one with some sort of shock absorption quirk. Kami, this wasn't good. This thing must have multiple quirks: shock absorption, super strength, super speed, and given the brain matter he watched knit itself back together, Izuku assumed it must have regenerative capabilities as well. He scrambled to his feet as quickly as he could and started to lead the beast away from Eraser's prone form. He seemed to be falling in and out of consciousness, which was good. That meant he was still alive, and damn it, he was going to stay that way if it was the last thing Izuku did. It took every bit of Izuku's focus to dodge the creature's hits. It was too fast. Izuku was going to kiss the ground All Might walked on for making him spar with him and Gran Torino, because he was sure that experience was the only thing keeping him alive right now. Even with that training, all it took was one slip up, one lapse in focus for Izuku to go down. He heard Shigaraki screaming about making All Might pay, about killing his colleagues and students, and Izuku glanced up before he could think better of it. Shigaraki was charging toward Eraser, who was still laying on the ground, and Izuku started running back for him when he felt a massive hand grab his leg. He couldn't help the scream that ripped itself from his chest as he felt his bones crunch like they were nothing more than potato chips. The Nomu flung him across the plaza for a second time, sending him crashing into the steps, and he felt several somethings in his chest crack. Shit, that was not good. He looked up to see the Nomu charging for him again. He tried to force himself to his feet, but sitting up was the best he could manage. His right leg was mangled. Distantly, he registered a loud boom coming from somewhere in the facility, but he paid it no mind. If he didn't stop the next hit from coming, he was going to die. His right arm wasn't as bad as his leg, but it was hurt enough for Izuku to know it was broken, so he pushed himself up and as far away from where the Nomu was headed as best he could with just his left side. As the beast went to charge again, Izuku saw Shigaraki finally make his way to Aizawa, and something in him snapped. He forced himself up onto his good leg with an awful scream, but he didn't get a step closer before Aizawa was gone, in a blur of white and yellow. Before he could even begin to question it, massive arms had enveloped him. For a split second, Izuku thought it was the Nomu. He thought he was dead, but the arms were far too gentle for that. He had never been so glad to see All Might. When Toshinori broke into the USJ, he was met by a scene from a nightmare. He saw 13 on the ground, surrounded by a handful of students. The rest were spread throughout the facility. He had no way of knowing if they were safe, but he knew one thing for sure: Aizawa was about to die. He was hardly moving and covered in far too much blood on the ground in the center of the plaza, with his arms limp and mangled at his sides. And a villain was pinning him down with a hand around his throat. Moving faster than he had in ages, he leapt to the pair in one bound and sent the villain sprawling to the other side of the clearing. He gathered Aizawa in his arms as gently and quickly as he could, bringing him to the outskirts of the plaza, but at the same time he heard a horrible, gut-wrenching scream of pain. When he looked up, he was horrified to see his protege standing on a clearly broken leg and struggling to get away from some massive beast. He set Aizawa down less gently than he would have liked to, and charged back into the fray, swooping the boy out not a second too soon. He struggled for a moment, but when he looked up, his slightly unfocused eyes gained frightening clarity as he spoke. All Might, that thing has multiple quirks. It was made to kill you. Shock absorption, super strength, super speed, and regeneration. It's not human. You need to kill it or it will kill you and everyone else here. Aim for its brain, he ordered clinically with no emotion. He didn't stumble or stutter over his words, and his tone left no room for argument. It was unsettling. It was something he'd never seen from the boy. But Toshinori didn't have the time to dwell on that. Setting him down as far away from the fight as he thought he could get away with, he charged back in. He met the creature as it was halfway back to Midoriya, seemingly still trying to rip him limb from limb. Toshinori hadn't been this angry since Nana died, and he let that anger fuel him as he hit the beast with a punch hard enough to crack all the glass in the facility. But the creature didn't budge. Shock absorption. Shit. He met the thing blow for blow as he tried to think of a way out of this without committing a very gruesome murder in front of Kami only knows how many students. The fight kept waging with no end in sight. The creature wasn't waning in the slightest, while Toshinori was fast approaching his absolute limits. He needed to end this. Looking into the thing's blank eyes, he saw nothing reflected in them. This beast was hollow. If it had ever been alive, it certainly wasn't anymore. Just past its eyes, he saw young Midoriya's knife embedded to the hilt in its brain matter. He hated the implications of that. He hated that his boy had gotten close enough to this thing to do that. Had he fought this monster on his own? Amid his fury and horror, he felt a swell of pride that his protege lived through that fight. He remembered his words. You need to kill it or it will kill you and everyone else here. He would not let this monstrosity hurt that boy again, not even over his dead body. Strengthening his resolve, he grabbed the beast's maw in one hand, pulling its head close enough for him to grab hold of the knife, and he plunged it into its brain over and over until its wails quieted and it fell to the ground at his feet. It made Toshinori sick. Those screams were going to echo in his mind for many moons to come. He was quite sure of that. He took several paces back in disgust until he could feel his grip on his form slip. He was done. One more move and he was going to collapse. It was all he could do to stare down the psychotic little man running toward him. He didn't have an ounce of fight left, so he was immeasurably grateful to hear a shot ring out from the entrance and strike the man down. He turned his head to make sure it was friendly fire, and that was enough for him to break. He went down and distantly acknowledged the wall of cement rising around him. He owed Cementos a thank you card and several fruit baskets. He fell to the ground and gasped desperately for air that refused to fill his mangled lung. He could taste the familiar tinge of iron on his tongue as he choked on his own blood. He struggled for air long enough to worry that this might be the end of him anyway, until Recovery Girl came rushing forward on another slab of concrete, and Toshinori vowed to get Cementos an entire liquor store if he wanted it. Shuzenji pecked him on the head, and glorious oxygen filled his lungs as bone-deep exhaustion settled in. End of chapter.